Hello and welcome everyone to our Agility and Adaptation in Uncertain Times Roundtable with Startup CEOs and Leaders. I am Simon Anderson and I'm the founder and CEO of Mission or Mission Cloud. And I have three great panelists here today to talk with us about this topic. And we have some very interesting discussion topics to cover. So welcome, and I will now introduce each of our panelists. And why don't we start with you, Sherry?
Hello, my name is Sherry Karam-Dashti. I am one of the sales leaders at AWS, supporting our startup customers. I've been at AWS for over 7 years, and I'm thrilled to be here.
And now let's go over to Jim.
Hey there, Jim Andelman, Bonfire Ventures. I've been a VC for going on 20 years now. I'm almost embarrassed to admit, so incapable of talking about anything other than startups. Bonfire is a tightly focused venture firm. We invest at seed stage, SEED, only in B2B software companies.
Thank you, Jim. And Chris, let's have you introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. This is Chris Nicholson, co-founder and CEO for Impulse Mobile. We are really specialized in the healthcare sector with a SaaS platform that drives conversational AI, messaging, and engagement to improve health outcomes. We are about 5 years old now, proud to have Jim Andelman and the Bonfire team as one of our investors. And so it's exciting to talk about the changes and the agility that we've all had to face over the last several months. So thanks, Simon, for having us.
Absolutely. Thank you all for being here. So our discussion topics for today, there's 4 of them, all extremely important. We've organized them in many ways in sort of sequential order from a time perspective, because the last 6 months or so, if we all recall a long time ago back in January and February when the coronavirus was in China, and but then unbeknownst to many people was actually starting to spread within the US. We all had to figure out remote work and supporting a distributed team as companies shifted to remote. So we're going to have a whole discussion around that, because obviously that's continued, and we have companies, large companies as well, that are now planning to stay remote or enable their team to stay remote through to the middle of next year. Second topic is surviving during COVID. The COVID crisis, not only the health crisis, has required a lot of adaptation from a health perspective, but also has driven, as we all know, incredible economic challenges for different sectors of the economy. And so how has startups reacted to that and adjusted and so on is going to be our second topic. Our third topic is playing offense as well as defense. And this is a topic around what are some of the strategies that startups are using to identify new opportunities for products or services or programs that address new pain points and demand in this current environment. And the final topic, and really the most important topic, because it spans not only business but social and just the future of this country, in my opinion, is addressing racial injustice. And so we're going to talk about fostering open dialogue and what sort of steps and learnings has the panel had in terms of addressing racial injustice in this period. So we'll start with the first topic. And Chris, your team was already used to interacting remotely, but also you'd shared with me that you got a lot of benefit out of the collaboration that you saw in the office, and all of a sudden had to shift to a remote work situation. Can you share some of the things that you thought about and implemented in order to make that work, and then maybe some of the things that didn't work?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sort of a traditionalist, I think, when it comes to office and working environment, right? So I've been in business for a while. I've worked for large, Fortune 500 companies. And so the office environment was pretty traditional. And I'm even new to California, where things are much more, flexible from a work perspective. And so, for us to make the transition was a little bit, sort of challenging at first. We've got a lot of knowledge workers on the team and development engineers and product managers. But a lot of our teams are like sales and account management are dispersed across the US. And so we're probably today for 100 employees, about a third of those were already remote, and then 2/3 were in the office. And so that was the big transition. It all became real to me, which was kind of interesting, when one of our customers, I think it was on March 10th or 11th, called and said, we need to see your business continuity plan because everybody's going to work at home. And I went, oh my gosh, this is really happening. And so, we're like, great, let's pull out the business continuity plan. And then within, 24 hours, moved the entire, staff to a virtual environment. And so luckily, we were able to do that from a technology standpoint very quickly, that everything that we work with is in the cloud. And so we're supported from that perspective, private VPNs for all of our networking because we're HIPAA compliant and high trust. And so that part was great. I think where we needed to get some learnings was on the cultural aspect of how do we manage team and culture and collaboration in a virtual environment. So we all quickly jumped to Zoom and jumped to Teams and the other tools that we were using, but we still weren't getting the same level of engagement that we were in an office environment. And I think a lot of that was that people weren't sure how long it was going to last, right? So they're like, should I engage or should I not engage? Is this 2 weeks or 2 months or, is this a year, right? And so that was, I think, the biggest challenge. And so we quickly had to step in and build cadence with our, weekly town hall meetings and really sort of even changing the management structure for how people reported and checked in to manage that complexity as well during that time period. And I think we're getting there, but we're still not perfect. I would say there's still a 5 to 10% of the team that I'm concerned about, honestly. And how do we make sure we bring them into the fold? Are we keeping them engaged? And they're usually the ones who, when we get on Zoom, don't share the camera, maybe don't, jump on Teams as often, don't participate in weekly challenges or things that are happening. And so for me, I'm putting the challenge to the team is how do we bring that last 5% into the mix and make sure we're engaging all of our associates in this new structure as well. So just one of the things that we're working through still.
And Chris, you shared with me a fun story, which I thought was worthwhile sharing with the group, about how at your all hands meetings or your all team meetings, you had the idea, or someone had the idea, to actually have the kids of the presenters do the readouts at the all hands. Yeah,
that was so much fun. And so what I noticed over a few weeks was that a lot of people felt really, kind of guilty because their kids may pop into the back of the camera, ask them, to turn change the channel or to borrow their phone or, need to use the restroom, whatever it may be. And so they felt embarrassed that their kids were, in the background. And so we wanted to make it really okay to have people have their kids involved in those discussions and not, for them to feel embarrassed about it. So we did. So we had all of the, each of our, leaders had a designee from the team that gave the readouts on sales and pipeline and business development and all the activities, and so everything from 13 years old down to 6 years old that were doing the readouts was a huge hit for the team. So that one was successful. Now, last night we had a huge flop. We actually tried a virtual escape room where people would get on and then try to do problem solving, virtually. And that was a disaster. So we ended up, I think, just all having a beer and chatting, versus working through the escape room. But you win some, you lose some.
That's great. Those kind of really specific, stories are what it's all about, I think, because we've got to try things and then see if they succeed or fail. One thing that I would spin on this would be we followed, IBM came out with a remote work pledge document, which we looked at Mission, and we're like, this is really interesting. So we created our own distributed team commitment, and actually one of our team can probably share it on the chat or share it with the group afterwards. But it basically, talks about the fact that because we're working from home and in our location, it's okay to have your camera off, or it's okay if kids walk through the background, or it's okay if and so really giving people permission to sort of work in that way, which I think it's an important, thing for health and mental health. So Sherry, I wanted to go over to you because at AWS, AWS is famous for its day one leadership principle, which is, always about focusing on, effectively like being a startup, like it is day one each day. Yeah. And of course, AWS has now grown to be a $40 billion enterprise and so on. But really, had to move pretty quickly because being based in the Seattle area where there was a lot of COVID early on, to remote work and so on. And I think you had some interesting observations around how, even a larger company had to really try and move quickly and address things like, emotional well-being and so on, that would be interesting to share.
Yeah, I would have to say that, from a sales organization, it was a little bit easier because we are in the field, we are, naturally out and about with customers. So I would say that our adjustment was easy as far as, going to distributed adjustment, but I'm really proud of how quickly people were able to adjust and kind of keep focus and really running on adrenaline and, on customer meetings and internal calls at the same time. Our organization is somewhat new. We have extra investment in sales to support our early stage startups. So on the flip side, we had 50% of new hires and onboarding. So that was basically the biggest challenge for us. But we didn't want to get bogged down with some of the big decision-making and processes. So we definitely had to kind of take a step back and think about being nimble and making decisions quickly so that one, our new hires felt included, right? And without having, the office environment or their mentors or their managers in the office. And then secondly, we, this whole like fatigue, I think if you think all of us, we probably spend more time working because I don't have to commute into the office. I'm not on the plane. And so I do think that, I notice a lot and we take extra care to check in with folks. To make sure, they're okay and how are they managing, whether it's their physical environment. So, and we partnered with one of our startups and Amazon provides, it's a meditation app. We provide they provided free access to the application for meditation and well-being. So, and then thirdly, I think on the sales side, half of our job is, well, maybe not half, but maybe 25% of our job is having fun and connecting with customers and establishing relationships. And so that part of the job was definitely missing. And, our motto at Amazon is work hard, play hard, make history. And so everybody was working really hard, but they weren't playing at all. So that is definitely something that we have room for improvement and trying to figure out how to infuse a little bit of fun and social well-being back into our day.
That's great. Thanks for sharing. On the fun side at Mission, one little thing that did work that our people team put together, which was awesome, was we actually did a virtual concert. So they found a band in Austin, Texas, and the band had a whole Zoom setup. So the sound was quite good, but then it could be interactive. And then at one of our social hours on Friday, we had a whole concert from this band, but then we were able to interact with them between songs. And of course there were some cocktails and they were sharing what cocktails they were drinking and so on. So there's definitely good things you can experiment with. Over to you, Jim. As a VC, remote work, I'm sure, is pretty interesting, from a financial perspective, because early stage VCs, you really want your investment money to go toward product and growth and talent and all that sort of thing. So I'm sure, to some degree, the potential cost savings from teams being remote is great, but you have such a view over a broad portfolio of companies. What are some of the things that you've seen have either worked or not worked, in moving to a remote work and distributed team environment? You just need to unmute.
I certainly do. Thanks, Simon. I could answer these questions sort of multiple levels, right? We are a small company ourselves, a 5-person team that is accustomed to working together, co-located in an office. And now, 4 months it has been a different story for us. And then also we have sort of, a view across 50 or so portfolio companies, with varying degrees of intensity of engagement. It is to some degree, all the folks, sort of discussing this topic on this call have a relative advantage, right? The odds are we are younger companies, and therefore we're probably a little bit more forward thinking with respect to our technology stack, in contrast to your average business across the country or across the world. So, you know, we probably have more cloud-based applications, more digital collaboration tools than the average bear, if you will. So I think that's that is a net positive, that the average startup may be a little bit more prepared for this going in. You know, also, as Sherry mentioned, like a lot of, my personal MO before COVID hit, you know, for the last 15 years, I've been away from home 3 nights a week. And so my office, and I'm accustomed to working wherever my laptop is. I haven't slept in my own bed this many nights in a row since high school. And so, you know, that's a silver lining. It's been a blessing to be able to be, you know, have some component of my life be more settled than it has been historically, and, you know, and spend time with wife and kids. You know, obviously one needs access to the tools to enable people to do their jobs. That's table stakes. It's pretty clear when you don't have them. And, you know, for the most part, it's sort of a Google search away, figuring out what you should be using to enable that. I think that's the easy part. I think something that, you know, Chris hit on is the hard part is sort of managing and mitigating the externalities. You know, for example, if you have, you know, I was talking to one of the founders that we support, and, you know, he's got a wife who has a career that is equal to his, and 2 kids that are on Zoom for school. They have sort of 4 people on Zoom at any given time, and they don't have 4 rooms in their apartment. Like, that's hard. And those are challenges to mitigate. A member of our own team had such a similar situation, lives in LA, was working out of his garage, and there were some days in June when it was like 100 degrees in LA. And, you know, we took some of that, I guess philosophically, took some of the budget that we would otherwise be spending on travel, and, you know, and we bought him a portable air conditioner and just sent it to the house. So then, you know, the garage became more palatable. And that's something that we've seen a good number of companies doing, which is like, give every employee a budget, whether it's a one-time budget for a setup, right? If you need a stand-up desk, if you need, you know, a good wireless keyboard and mouse, if you need a second screen at home, to make your work environment healthy and more effective. Others do a monthly stipend that can be, you know, for things that keep your kids engaged so you can get some work done, or better broadband access. And it ends up being not a net incremental expenditure, again, because most companies are saving on some form of office occupancy or reduced travel budget or something like that. You know, it's interesting. One of the, also for small companies, oftentimes, right, we just do B2B software that are engaging with larger enterprises that may have been not as equipped for their own team members to work remote. I don't know, you know, Chris is smiling. You know, it seems that probably your average startup employee is more physically and emotionally equipped to work remote than perhaps your average big company employee. One of the things we found is, in particular, companies selling to enterprise, is like bottom of funnel progress in sales. It was procurement and legal at the big company customer that was least equipped to work from home, right? They intentionally, like your general counsel is probably intentionally working with tools that are locked down and on-prem, because they're the ones thinking most in their company about risk and risk mitigation. And so a lot of bottom of funnel deals got really stuck, especially at the beginning of COVID. And so had to work through, you know, with teams, how to manage that, how to keep people's, you know, how to keep deals moving forward in an environment where there were sort of new and previously undiscovered sticking points.
That's great. And the second topic, surviving during COVID, you know, the reason it's sort of butted up against this one is there's definitely a blend there, right? And Sherry, what's interesting, from working closely with AWS is that, AWS was really built and architected from the beginning to be this pay-as-you-go service, pay for what you use, no forward commitments, and so on. Which is it's a great benefit when all of a sudden, as a company, you need to cut costs. And so, we at Mission have spent quite a bit of time with customers over the last, particularly in March and April and into May, that were just in industries that were really dramatically impacted by the economic shutdown. Travel, entertainment, ticketing, leisure, those sort of industries. I mean, we've had customers who are ticketing companies and literally their business almost entirely went away. But because of the way AWS is designed and running their software on AWS, we're really able to help them, dial it back significantly because the usage just wasn't there, and so on. So I know AWS has been, working, and your team has been working with a lot of startups to try and figure out, how do we help you save cost? How do we help you cut costs in this environment?
Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, I think agility is needed in uncertain times, and the nature of cloud computing facilitates such a thing. And that elasticity allows our startups to move quickly, but also slow down, right, when they're needed. So I would say you're right on. I think our Q2, starting March, our customers were laser focused on cutting cost, whether it was reducing their cloud spend, whether it was optimization of their architecture, shutting down resources that were, not used. Focus, I think Jim and Chris can say, validate that, there was this focus on preserving capital. And I think we had to pivot, some of our initiatives and some of our focus to make sure that we were responding to our customers with their cost optimization efforts. And and our customers, again, they, a lot of the startups laid off a lot of folks in their workforce. So that was one part of cutting costs, but the cloud spend was definitely a second component. And not just in the startup, but all of America's sales, we, I mean, it was millions and millions of dollars in monthly savings that we were able to achieve, through this effort, just from March to June.
Yeah, that's great. And I know, Chris, being in health tech, your company, interestingly, had opportunity to sort of thrive during the virus as well. But, we'll get onto that in a little minute. But I'm interested to know, when you saw the economic shutdown coming, you dealt with going remote, and then all of a sudden, how did you kind of like sense what was going on and kind of figure out, well, what is going to happen over the next couple of months?
Yeah, no, great question. And I'll come to that in a second. I do have to come back to one comment Jim made, just because I think it's funny, is Jim, you're talking about sort of, legal and contracting and procurement, is that we literally had one of our customers a deal that took 4 extra weeks because they only allowed for a wet signature process. So yes, in 2020, that in healthcare, that is still a thing. And the champion was so motivated to get our deal done that he literally drove to 4 executives' homes all over the Los Angeles area to get them to sign it physically so they could return it back to council and get it to move forward. So those are things that just like kill process, kill pipeline, but still exist in this world. So, so I think coming back to your question, specifically is that, we were, I think, fortunate by being in healthcare and sort of observing the space. We quickly had to ramp up. And I think, Sherry, you mentioned the elasticity and sort of the value of some of the, cloud-based solutions and that work is that we ramped up and actually messaged about 80 million messages just over the course of sort of April and May specific to COVID. And so we built out 60 plus new programs, new solutions for our customers as it was evolving from, helping to close gaps in care and get people to appointments and get people to care and coverage, to all of a sudden the messaging and the engagement shifted around prevention, services, wearing masks, where to get screening locations, completed. And so the entire sort of content strategy and philosophy had to pivot really quickly. And, just kudos to our account management team that I think they stay so closely connected to our customers on what those needs are. And as soon as they sort of felt the inflection point, then they really rapidly sort of made the adjustment that says, what can we do to help support it? And then we ended up just sort of falling in a really good space at the time. We've actually been blessed to scale up. We've added about 14 team members during this time period. And so, the market has been good to us there. We're really trying to lean in and be really proactive and sort of aggressive as we look at the second half of the year, and what other opportunities can we try to capture that have sort of identified themselves during this time period.
Great. And Jim, in terms of advice to your portfolio companies in March and so on, there's some, anytime we go into an economic downturn, there's always, VCs that speak out boldly and say, get ready and, take action and that sort of thing. What are some of the things that your companies have done or that you really recommended to, because we're still in it, candidly, we may feel
Sure.
like, the economy is improving and that sort of thing, but it's still way below where it was. So.
Yeah, I think, and where everyone is sitting right now, it's less interesting what we did in March, and it's more interesting what we think, right now. It's funny, we get asked frequently for essentially benchmarking data, right? A portfolio company team will ask us, well, what's everyone else doing, right? It was like, how much, to what degree should we be adjusting our forecast? What's everybody else doing? And one of the, I think, an important aspect of this phenomenon is that the COVID impact is so market and sector and company and even product specific that there are no broad generalizable, like, oh, everyone should just cut, GDP is down X%, so we should all cut our forecast by X%. And there are logical extremes, right? Simon, you mentioned a good logical extreme on the downside is, if you do event ticketing, right, you might just be, you might see your business down 90%. On the flip side, we have a company called ChowNow, which makes software for restaurants to enable them to do online ordering. They saw their new bookings quadruple in a month, their rate of new bookings. And so, they can't hire fast enough to meet demand. Similarly, we have another investment in a business that has a software platform that allows primary care physicians to do remote patient monitoring, right? And it enables them to provide care without people coming to the office, an incremental revenue stream. That's been a very easy sell, and they're getting a nice COVID tailwind. And so it really is situation specific. But that said, more companies certainly have been harmed than helped. And so you can generalize, if you're in that broad bucket, you're not alone, and there's reporting bias, so you hear more about the ones that I just mentioned, and that's not fair, and it hurts your psychology. But for the average operator, you are not alone in that this is adversely impacting your business. The businesses get to continue to survive so long as they have cash in the bank and can pay their bills and pay their payroll. So if you think about, wow, to what degree should we course correct? If you course correct too aggressively, meaning you cut costs a little too much, more than you should have in retrospect, maybe you forego some growth rate opportunity. If you course correct not enough, right, that can create an existential threat to your business. So our guidance has been and continues to be, right, if you're not sure what the right level of adjustment is, maybe adjust a little bit more than you otherwise would have. You can always add back expenses. You can't unrun out of money. That said, right, it's also important to instrument your business such that you can recognize positive signal when it's coming from the market and lean into those positive signals judiciously so that you are not missing too much opportunity. So that might be, for example, recognizing which of the sector, you might serve a variety of sectors and business categories, which of those are getting a COVID tailwind and are the ones you should focus on in your outbound, because they're going to be more receptive to your businesses, your product's value prop. They're not just going to be in cost cutting mode. That's a good example. Which of your customer segments are actually still growing And that's something you can think about proactively. Which customer segments maybe have you not been targeting because they haven't historically been the low-hanging fruit, but are ones that you have a good value prop for, that you should engage with for the first time. Those are some examples. I think it has helped the founders we support to know broadly, to get guidance from us as to broadly what other companies are doing, because it does sort of give you permission to do some things that you maybe thought wouldn't be received well or wouldn't be appropriate. It was interesting. There's a compensation consultant that serves the startup ecosystem called Jay Philander, and they did a survey in April around startup compensation. And I was surprised by the statistic. They found more than 90% of startups were doing executive pay cuts. And more than 60% were doing broad-based pay cuts down to the IC level. And I think that was helpful for founders to hear, that are appropriately sort of fiercely protective of their team, and and there's been a mindset, I think, for the last, we were in the 12th year of a 12-year bull market. So there's that mindset of like, oh, I can't do anything that might risk losing my team. And I think the message of, gosh, we're all going to take, a haircut together, and we, the executive team, are going to take a deeper cut than anybody else. And we don't know how long or how deep this is going to be. And we will reinstate, some or all, as quickly as we can. And doing this enables us to keep this awesome team together and not do layoffs, or not do more layoffs than we would otherwise need to. I think for the most part has been very well received by teams. And we're already seeing, a number of those companies that did that have gotten that positive signal, have seen an upward trend in June and July after a big downward trend in April and maybe May, and are able to reinstate those original, sort of pre-COVID pay levels now.
Yeah, and that's another good segue to our next topic. But I will just share, at Mission, we absolutely did that. It was a bit of a scary step, but because we have money in the bank and a business that we thought would be pretty resilient during this time. But we did a salary reduction across the board, except for our entry-level team members. And then we stepped it from, I, as the CEO, took the largest percentage reduction, and then there was an algorithm which was very fair in terms of the percentage decreasing, benchmarked against me. But what it also enabled us to do is, it was really interesting. It was really well received by the team. We did share exactly how many people we were actually able to keep, that we otherwise would have had a question on. And then the second thing we did is we re-implemented for Q2 a company-wide incentive plan for the quarter to hit certain operating metrics that were really critical to us to survive during that period. And the team ended up hitting 6 out of the 7 of them, so they all got bonused on the 15th of July, and in effect sort of earned back a big piece of what they otherwise would have sacrificed. So it's being bold and embracing those kind of things is a very important thing to do, not to be afraid of that. And in fact, it can really bring the team together.
Yeah.
So I'll just go back to the share.
Can I make a follow-on point?
Yes.
I think one of the real challenges here is, we're all running a race, and we don't know how long this race is. So we have no idea how to pace ourselves. I think when we started in March, we thought it was going to be a sprint, because there was, sort of 2 weeks of lockdown or a month of lockdown, and then the expectation was going to be lifted. We've learned it's not a sprint, right? But is it a 10K? Is it a marathon? Is it an ultra marathon? We don't know yet. And I think that is challenging to figure out sort of what level of austerity is necessary, because at what point do things go back to normal? One of the things I worry about right now is false positive signal. A lot of our companies had a surprisingly good June and July, right? They reforecast, their COVID reforecast was down 35% against their pre-COVID forecast. And lo and behold, they're almost back to baseline, right? Or they're back to baseline, or they experience net growth, and that may be true and may persist, and may mean that we can start, investing in growth again. But we also have surging cases. The smart thing to do from a societal and a long-term economic benefit perspective might be to lock down again, which would then have us dip again. No idea whether that's going to happen or how widespread that's going to be. So we're working through at this very moment with companies to what degree they should be relaxing the constraints that they imposed or introduced starting with COVID. And again, it's going to be company specific and situation specific.
Thanks for that. Yes, I very much agree, and we're certainly being cautious. Chris, on this third topic here with offense as well as defense, and I'm actually going to keep this topic a little bit shorter because I really want to have a very healthy discussion around the fourth topic. But Chris, you in particular, being in healthcare tech or medical technology, you saw a lot of opportunity, but as well, it was, you had to rally the team, or the team had to figure out, look, how do we address this new opportunity, and so on. So how did you go about thinking about that, talking about that to the team? Give us some specifics around, because you did manage to actually create some new solutions very quickly for your customer base to take advantage of, playing offense as well as defense.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was an interesting time for us because we were right in the middle of a Series C fundraise process, and so we closed our Series C April 14th, and so right in the middle of this, and Jim and others, and bringing some great investor partners, as we sort of really just flipped our strategy sort of on its head. That says we know what our core platform can do, but the solutions that ride on it will change, right? And so we felt like that was scalable and extensible into a broad base of segments. And as Jim had highlighted, some of our sub-verticals that we were in, like in behavioral health and the health plan community, especially in Medicaid, really took off. But our provider segment and the integrated delivery network, those all sort of were the ones that were in kind of trailing mode, because people weren't, hitting those appointments or utilization. So, we did step back, and really looked at it strategically and just said, what pockets do we think, and this was a bit of a guess, right? What pockets do we think will be affected positively, and which ones do we think will be affected negatively? And then try to ramp up the capabilities for those as well. So that was, I think, really it from an offensive perspective. We did a lot defensively on, looking at our staff plans, where do we hold off on hiring, shifting in, where we can cut cost and space, travel, and other factors as well. That was on the defensive end. But we've been a little bit more probably bullish on investing and hiring, because we're sort of fortunate to get that additional capital in, that we think will push us through this curve and hopefully come out stronger than we would have been if we just sort of did a wait and see mode. So that's been the strategy. And, second quarter was harder. Third quarter, we're already actually had a plan for 3Q. So we're hoping that the second half of the year will really get those tailwinds and push us forward.
That's great. And yeah, look, it's well known, of course, that over the last 30 years, some of the most successful startups in history have really got going, or created their differentiation or expanded on their differentiation, during downturns, and so it's a very opportune time to be doing that. And Sherry, I wanted to throw it over to you because as we talked about before, AWS is a very strong culture. The leadership principles, which I've read and studied and so on, include having permission to fail, being able to take a risk, make a decision more quickly when there's less information and that kind of thing. When you see the startups that are running on AWS and so on, are you seeing them start to sort of invest again? Because of course there's lots of opportunity with new technologies in the data and analytics, AI, machine learning, and so on, that can create that differentiation to applications and products and services and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I was like mentioning, that first half or the second quarter was a lot around cost optimization. And I think we are definitely seeing a shift where we're seeing projects that our startups are investing in around, and our AI/ML pipeline looks very strong. And it's not just in June, July, it's things that people have been doing in the downturn, so that we are seeing a lot of innovation projects, a lot of new product enhancements, and getting into new markets. So the ones that are able to innovate through after cost optimization, we are seeing that shift. But on the other side, I just heard Jim, and it hit really close, where it's like, yeah, are these false positives? Like, you know, my sales team's forecasts are definitely very optimistic, and probably not as optimistic as mine, because of that exact mentality of, you know, we need a few more months or maybe longer to really see how this shakes out. On the whole, you know, culture, I would say, you know, what sets, you know, Amazon apart, I think, from a lot of companies, and a lot of our customers are really interested to hear about it, is the culture of innovation that we have and that we foster. And it's really rooted in exactly what you said, is that we have to pioneer through the tough times and take risks, and risk being misunderstood, and think long term. So, you know, a lot of our executive briefings and things we do, a lot of our executives do want to hear about, you know, how do you instill that culture of innovation? So it is absolutely something that I think is critical in surviving through the downturn, if you have the luxury, you know, to take advantage of the downturn, for sure.
Simon, you're still on mute.
Unmuted. I saw that. It flashed up there. Thank you, Zoom. And Jim. I'm going to jump to our final topic, which is incredibly important, and which is addressing racial injustice. And, you know, as we're all hyper aware, you know, the police killings of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and other African American and people of color has just sparked, not only sparked outrage, but really driven, you know, significant social action and protest, which is expanded to, you know, many racial and ethnic groups and so on. And so at Mission, you know, as a white male CEO, and once again, I want to acknowledge that this panel, you know, does not include an African American or you know, on the panel. And so at first, within about a week of George Floyd being killed, it was on the weekend actually afterwards, I was thinking to myself, I'm just like, you know, well, what do I do in this situation as a, you know, what do I do? How do I take a step forward? And so the first thing I did was just to, and I'd been reading, I had actually read, which is the most important thing for me to do, is read and listen, and you know, but I'd read it's just important to create an environment for being able to share, people being able to share their emotions at work, you know, how they're feeling and that kind of thing. So we did that on the Monday right after that weekend, and it was a really powerful first step. And from that, as a team, we really committed to this process of listening and learning and so on. And we had always measured diversity and had diversity goals, you know, since the beginning of starting the company, which of course, if you don't measure something, you don't really know how to, you know, pursue it and address it. But even so, and having one of our core values be inclusive, we still felt as a leadership team that you know, we had to look at every part of our business and try and figure out, look, what are we doing that may be, you know, suppressing African Americans or people of color in terms of opportunity? What are we doing? You know, like, let's just look at this and understand that systemic racism is everywhere, and it doesn't mean that a person necessarily is a racist if they are following systemic racism, but it's just, it can be invisible. So we just really opened up on that and accepted that, and have continued that, you know, that reading and listening and engaging. And it's look, I think it's been overall very positive first steps, you know, in our mission community. But I wanted to open it up to the group, and Jim, I think probably go back to you, because, you know, as an investor, as a venture capitalist, you have a unique, or you have a pretty big platform, I would say, to be able to affect change in this area, because it's not just one company, but you sit across a number of companies and have a certain amount of influence. Certainly not absolute influence, but you have a certain amount of influence. So can you share, you know, some of the things that you were already doing around racial injustice and really trying to address inequality, and then the things that you've sort of amped up since in the last few months?
Certainly, thanks for asking. We too unfortunately are currently an all-white male investment team. It was not our intention. It's not how we think about ourselves, and we're trying to rectify that as we speak. But interestingly, for the last 2 years, we have included, you know, we are typically a lead investor. We are typically a company's first institutional lead. And for the last 2 years, really precipitated by the Me Too movement, you know, that started in 2018, we have included the 2 items in every single term sheet we issue. One is a diversity inclusion clause, which requires that the company commit to including at least one candidate as a finalist for every leadership role that they're hiring for. So there's not a quota on hiring, right? That would be, I think, a challenge for a lot of companies. But it's to try to address sort of the pipeline issue, and, you know, encourage people to go out of their way to source the candidates that might not naturally come to them. And then the other clause is an anti-harassment program and policy that, you know, include in your employee handbook a statement around anti-harassment, and include and establish processes through which it can be reported and addressed and remediated if necessary, in a transparent and fair way that ensures that there's no retaliation. I think that's very important, and I hope it becomes more widespread. You know, if you think about, I'll do it sort of personally, like, you know, we have the opportunity to help fix this with hiring and with check writing. You know, VC does tend to be a referral-based business, because there is a lot of random inbound, and that can be that there is a much lower signal to noise in the unsolicited inbound cohort of opportunities for investment. So that's, you know, there is a logical reason that VCs do appreciate referrals, but it can have an unintended negative consequence. What we have done and are continuing to do are increasing, to your question, are thinking proactively about the referral sources that could provide introductions to entrepreneurs and founders from underrepresented categories. And we are reaching out to those folks, making sure that they know that we are interested, making sure that they know what we look for, and making sure that they know that that we will be responsive to their referrals. And then on the other side, it's sort of proactive referring, right? We, as a seed investor, the majority of our companies go on to raise subsequent rounds, and we have developed a list of follow-on investors, Series A, Series B, Series C, who represent underrepresented, you know, who are members of underrepresented categories, and we make sure we send them the good stuff, right? Help them be more successful in their job, such that they can, you know, elevate their track record and their careers. You know, a nice example of the former a good friend of ours, Kobe Fuller at Upfront Ventures, co-founded a kind of I don't know if they like or don't like this label, but sort of, like a Black LinkedIn called Valence. And we're one of the founding members of the Valence Funding Network that basically says we're open for business and we're interested. And that's been a wonderful, source of getting connected to people, and it gives people permission to reach out to us unsolicited through that mechanism. And that's been a wonderful source of introductions and connections to folks that we wouldn't otherwise be connected to. Finally, I'll say, we've made 6 investments so far this year. We are a relatively low volume shop. 4 of those 6 include one founder that is a non-white male, at least one founder that is a non-white male. So to some degree, we feel like other people's unconscious bias is our opportunity. And we love folks from underrepresented classes because they have a chip on their shoulder and they're out to show everyone that they were wrong for saying no. Same thing with first generation founders. That has a disproportionate representation in our portfolio for the very same reason. We find that they're achievers and they'll more likely than not to bust through the walls that are necessary to build a startup into a meaningful business.
Thanks for sharing those specific examples, Jim, because I think in those are great examples of the diligence it really takes to just look at, whether it's the hiring practices. And, we at Mission have updated, we've had similar requirements to have underrepresented minorities and so on, and women, in each of our hiring engagements and so on. But we've really updated that in the last couple of months. We've really looked at it and thought about it and said, how do we even strengthen this further? And I think that's the message that I hear most clearly, is that it's a process, and it can't stop. It just has to keep going, and you have to turn over every stone and so on. And to that end, Chris, I'll throw to you. I understand, when George Floyd was killed and this momentum was building in the moment, that you had a moment as a CEO where you're like, look, what should I do in this situation? Mm-hmm. And there were some interesting learnings about that I think are very important.
Yeah, happy to share. And I think I probably, and I won't say probably, I didn't do it the right way, is what I will say. I was a bit more in that sort of wait and see, let's see what the news is. And I didn't realize, I think, the importance of my voice to the team. And the questions were, well, what's our position as a company? And I sort of looked at it as, well, isn't that clear? We deplore violence, we deplore racism. Do I need to make a statement on this topic, right? And so, it became sort of loud and clear after I sort of waited that week and said, okay, I've observed what's going on. I really actually do need that. And the company really does need to hear from me on the topic. And I admitted that to the group. I said, I waited too long to get to, our organization. And I just sort of took for granted that they would know what our position was. I think, and in that, I think we've recovered, well. I think we've got some great leaders in the organization that we built sub-teams within our culture, group that actually is organized around, supporting the conversation and dialogue. And then I was really proud because I thought, wow, this is great that the company, that our associates really feel like the company is a place where they can come and get that support, get that learning, and have an open conversation through the organization. We have our CTO, Ram Praga, who stepped up to be, the champion, really for this culture and diversity within our organization, as we've just completed a survey around, social bias and cultural bias to really understand where there may be additional pockets of opportunity. As our team is actually relatively diverse across nationalities, different cultures around the world, but then from, an African-American population, not as much so, and so that's one of the areas that we said we've got a really pretty diverse organization, but, there may be some areas that we need to truly focus on. The one area that we turned that I think was extremely positive is we looked at what can we do as a voice then for the marketplace. I think similar to, what Jim talked about is how can you use your influence? And we thought about our solution specifically is that the primary customers that we have are, Medicaid plans across the US that are supporting underserved populations. And so our focus around health equity and how we can use our communication channel, our vehicle, and our content to better, communicate, leverage those social determinants of health, and actually creating better programs for these underserved populations. And that was something that the team just got behind in full force and full vigor, was to say, now we actually do have a way to express ourselves. We do have a way to drive influence, and not doing it at a small scale, as we've got, 42 million members that we can actually influence across the US, and actually making better programs to support these underserved populations and really focus on health equity, and sort of level the playing field there. So that was sort of a really positive rally cry for our team. And we're still working through it. I mean, there's still, new conversations, new riots, new things that are happening that I think it's going to be an ongoing conversation. It needs to be, in the, at least over the next, year to 2 years, until we have some meaningful change.
Thanks for sharing, Chris. And yeah, admission as well, we sort of doubled down on, our cloud literacy sort of broader mission, which is, if cloud computing is really be this uniform, which we believe it is, and will be in future, then, everyone really should be cloud literate in order to, and particularly, underprivileged or underrepresented minorities, the more they can be cloud literate, the more they're going to be able to, move ahead in their careers and that kind of thing. And Sherry, so just in closing, AWS, or Amazon, I should say, from what I recall, was actually pretty early in coming out, with a very clear statement from, the founder and CEO, Jeff Bezos, that Black Lives Matter. And, there had been, reservations about, there's so much around that movement and the statement, but there'd been reservations from a corporate perspective to just really say Black Lives Matter, we support this. It does not mean, what other people say it to mean, which is that other people's lives don't matter. It means that this is a problem, and so on. So how did that permeate through the organization, just in closing, and anything else you'd like to share about how that statement gave permission for your team to sort of embrace and address racial injustice?
Yeah, so that was absolutely, I think, was a great, setting the role model, right, of how leaders should, step up front and be vocal and support causes and publicly stand up for racial justice and equality. And I think I'm really proud of working for Amazon. And in fact, Amazon came up with this employee matching initiative where, in the span of a month and a half, Amazon announced that obviously they were giving $10 million to 12 organizations that are working to bring about social justice and improve the lives of Black Americans. But Amazon offered for every employee that contributed to those 12 organizations, they were going to match it. And so I think you can take that role modeling, and exactly what we did was, having these courageous conversations, as you said, and creating a safe space for people to hear your view as a leader, and really allow them the space to express their feelings and commune with their fellow team members. And we took that and we actually, as a leadership team for the startup team, we did our own matching. So really we took $1 of employee contribution, we matched it $2, and then Amazon matched it to $4. So it's, again, I think that the feedback we got from our team was that they really appreciate it to have leaders that take a position and create the space for us to talk about it. I think we do have to be intentional to fuel diversity in our teams. I think Jim said, hey, it wasn't intentional, right? But if you look back, and myself included, if you're not intentional, you will probably end up not being as diverse as you need to be. And that's a differentiator for you as a team, because you'll have diversity of thought, experience, ideas, decision-making, and you'll represent your customers and partners and communities effectively. So it is definitely something that we take very seriously. We have an inclusion and diversity director working with our startups internally and our customers and partners. So, and of course, with our recruiting and that funnel of candidates, there's a lot of focus to improve that, so that we are giving every person a chance to be successful and have the opportunities to participate.
Thank you, Sherry. Well, look, and this is such a big and important topic. We could learn and listen and talk about it for a long time. But we have reached the top of the hour, and we want to keep things on schedule and not burn too many people's time. What I will say is, well, first of all, I'd just like to thank Sherry and Chris and Jim for your time and your thought and your care and your contribution. Really, I think it's been really valuable. It's been valuable for me as well, personally. And what I'd like to say as well is that I will just go over to the final slide here. We didn't have time to take any questions during the proceedings, but if anyone who is either attending, has attended this roundtable, or who otherwise is looking at it afterwards or viewing it afterwards, there is a link here in the slide deck here, missioncloud.com/ask-roundtable, that you can submit questions, and we will absolutely circle back on that, each of us as panelists, myself included, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask. A lot of this was about trying to be as specific as we can to be able to provide, as good insight and information for CEOs and leaders of startups to be able to take action during these times. So hopefully it's been the case, and we appreciate all of you attending and look forward to another one. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.